quel a été l'impact de ces privatisations des services publics? Merci.
Oui, oui, privatisation. La principale conséquence de l'eau, ça a été dit tout à l'heure, je crois que la facture au niveau du consommateur final, elle a augmenté. Moi, je suis du Maroc. Je sais que ça a été privatisé. Et évidemment, les citoyens, ils ne sont pas contents parce que la facture de l'eau a augmenté. Évidemment, la société, elle fait des investissements, de gros investissements. Ces gros investissements, il faut qu'ils soient rentables. Il faut faire du bénéfice. Donc voilà, et l'État ne doit plus être sinon réglementé. Oui, évidemment, il faut qu'il y ait des règles. Il faut qu'il y ait des règles, et ça a été dit tout à l'heure. Je crois que c'est parce que tout a été rappelé tout à l'heure que je ne suis pas revenu sur la question de l'eau liée à la privatisation.
Just to add a word from participation of the private sector in infrastructure more generally has been very varied. It's not always a question of privatizing something which was in the public sector. The question is to enlarge the number of actors that are allowed to work effectively in the sector. In various reports of the African Economic Outlook, we've looked at privatization processes, and we've looked at specific instances in the electric power sector, last year in transport, and this year to a certain extent in water. And we know also that private sector involvement in telecommunications has enabled countries to leap forward much, much more quickly than they were able to do with the model of purely public corporations providing all the services and paying for those largely with tax revenues. But the literature has many examples of failure where proper regulatory structures have not been put in place. Price rises to customers have seemed to be exaggerated, and there's been a kind of a political backlash that has sometimes tended to stop cold privatization processes. But have they had an impact? The answer is yes. When they've been put in place in circumstances with proper regulation and with a good preparation program for the general public, so that the kind of contracts that government has entered into with the private companies have included expansion or improvement of services that have been something that could be monitored and made visible over a relatively short period of time to basically justify the fact that the prices the consumer pays will go up. But basically, infrastructure has to be paid for by someone, and it's reasonable that part of the costs be paid for by the actual users. And when that principle is well established, it generates a revenue stream which permits private sector operators to play a role, which has to be always in the context of good regulation. Now, when those conditions have been met, services have been expanded more rapidly and at lower cost than in countries where a purely public sector model was the only approach to providing services in infrastructure areas generally, including water. But water is more difficult than the other sectors for a number of reasons that have been evoked already.
Thank you. I would like to state out very clearly at the outset, we do not have a policy as a country of privatizing water services, water provision, distribution, or whatever. The municipalities, in terms of the constitution, have got the right to reticulate services. So you talk water, sanitation, energy, and whatever. They also have a right, in terms of legislation, to choose whether to do it themselves or whether to get somebody else to do it for them. And even in that case, it is not privatized. It's the municipality's choice to say who they are going to utilize. So we do not have privatization of water services in our country. I also do not believe that when you set up a framework to enable private sector to participate and play a part, that it's on its own leads to privatization of the services. We have a framework where we invite public-private partnerships in these areas, and it hasn't led to privatization. So I cannot personally speak of an experience of what it means to privatize water services because we do not have that experience yet. I would say if you look at when we adopted our constitution and when we devolved the rights and the powers of reticulation of services to the municipalities, our system, I would regard it as a system that's still evolving. Maybe a few years from now, we are going to be able to say this has been the experience in terms of municipalities taking over this area of work from the national office.
Je voudrais juste ajouter un mot à ce qu'a dit très brillamment Madame la Ministre. Monsieur, il m'a semblé que vous maniez très très bien la langue française. Et je crois qu'il ne faut pas induire les gens en erreur, comme on le voit si souvent. Le terme de privatisation en français, il signifie que l'on vend les actifs en termes économiques. C'est le cas pour une compagnie aérienne que l'on privatise. C'est le cas pour une banque que l'on privatise. Ça n'est jamais le cas pour une société des eaux dont on ne vend pas les actifs. On ne vend pas les tuyaux, on ne vend pas les stations. Il s'agit d'une délégation du service, comme l'a très remarquablement expliqué Madame le Ministre. Et je pense qu'il ne faut pas jouer sur les mots pour faire peur aux gens. J'observe de surcroît qu'en Afrique, il y a moins de 1% du secteur de l'eau qui est géré par des sociétés privées. Moins de 1%. Et je pense que s'il y a des exemples de mauvaise gestion, et je le dis avec beaucoup de gentillesse, il y en a beaucoup plus dans le secteur public que dans le secteur privé.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'm going to take one last question, and I'm going to end with Ms. Katselli. A question on decentralization, I think, for Mr. Hendricks.
Well, just last one, since everybody is going out for lunch. The minister talked about the model of decentralization, and there's a lot of experience of decentralization. We heard about the capacity challenges. What do you think, as we move to a decentralization model, what are the main challenges for other countries which have not opted for decentralization? What do you think, and if I can ask also the other speakers, what have we learned about decentralization